Hello and well met. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to be talking about the data windows in Fantasy Grounds, in particular the groups and some of that functionality in there that is often missed or maybe even misunderstood. I sometimes forget what I can do with it. And there is an Atlassian page that explains how data windows look. So the theme or the frames might look differently, and they may call these different categories or different things, but they all have the same functionality. So you have a filtering system, and then you have your different chapters that come from different content that you have loaded. And then, of course, the content are all mixed together when you have it in this all category. So that takes everything you have loaded and kind of compiles it into one view. So you have different ways you can create your own groups, and you can also rename them. You can delete a group. You can move items to a different group. So there are different ways that you can do that, and we'll go over that in the interface. So a lot of the times when you load multiple items, it can get pretty overwhelming and confusing. So I'm going to open up the Fantasy Grounds platform. I am using the D&D 5e rule set, so your background and such might look a little different, but in most cases, this data on the right-hand side kind of operates the same way. They might be titled and themed for a different rule set, but it's going to be pretty much the same thing. So over here on the right-hand side, these are all of your data windows. And if you haven't used Fantasy Grounds before, or you're just getting started and you've only been using it for a couple months, this might help you a little bit. So whenever you open a new window, it typically opens in the very center. And that is by design. That's just the way they chose to default these windows. So they're always going to open there first. When you want to move things around or you need to resize a window, you're certainly welcome to do so. So each time you open that window up, it's not going to be in the very center. So if I take, for instance, if I open up encounters, that's going to be right smack dab in the middle. So that's something you'll have to get used to, and you'll want to move those elements out of your way once you have your table set up. That could be very annoying, especially that first time when you're not aware of it, that it's going to cover stuff. So that is an important aspect of learning how to use the platform and kind of using it for the way it was designed. It is kind of a weird UI design, kind of old, but it can be mitigated a little bit by following some of these tips. So that's just a thing that you'll notice right away. The next thing is the data window. So quite often there's a lot of questions about why there's so many things in one mixed up in one panel. That has to do with the content you have loaded. So if I open up modules and I have all these things loaded, I might be in the middle of character creation or planning for my next session. So I might want all these open for some reason. So what I'm going to do is show you is that, one, you can unload stuff that you're not using to kind of mitigate and narrow down the content that you're going to use. And the other thing is, like, when you open a window, such as a story entry or maybe even images, let's say, this is pretty common. So again, that moves in the middle. So what you can do is move these windows out of the way so they're not always constantly opening right in front of your content, or maybe it's covering your map or whatever it might be. So generally speaking, I will take a window like this, stick it in the bottom right corner here, and then I'll always know from that point on, in most cases, that that will open in that area. So that's really a powerful thing to know. It sounds very simple and kind of mundane, but once you understand that, it really makes that clutter and that sort of frustration kind of lower a little bit. The other thing is this group filtering. So I'm going to move this in the center again so we have more focus, but on the very top left, you have a group, or it's kind of like a category. So right now it says all. So on the right hand side, you can see that I got every single book open here, and there's some page numbers here. There's 21 pages worth of content. So to go through all these with this arrow could be very frustrating, especially in the middle of the game and you want to just find that one thing. There is a kind of a search window here, but there again, it depends on if you know what you're searching for. So what I would propose to do in this case, let's say you're running an adventure. In this case, I have the Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure. So if I want to only see the content in that adventure, I'm going to open up and scroll with the mouse wheel or you can use the slider over here on the right to which content I want to focus in. So if I want to focus on the Lost Mine of Phandelver artwork, or let's just say a map set. So if I want to go to the maps, here's the maps for Lost Mine of Phandelver. You click on that, and these are all categorized in this particular chapter or this group category. And that's how the modules are separated, is by these groups. So this is true of almost every single data type on the right-hand side. And then there's some relationship between the data too. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to kind of lay everything out so you can see what is what. So the images is probably one of the core functions and one of the things that people access quite a bit. So that's why I started with this one. There's also the story, which is kind of the heart of everything. And that's kind of evolved because it has been moved or starting to migrate towards the reference manual in a lot of cases. So you won't see as many story entries going forward. They're starting to migrate away from story entries, and they're going more towards the view that where you have the reference manual view. So if you open up your modules, and for instance, I have Lost Mine open here, or I have it activated, and you click on the reference manual, and this is where the content is going to be moving to, or has moved to, or it might be both, because if it's an older adventure, you're going to have both, or you might only have story entries. So it really depends on when the content was made and how long ago, that sort of thing. But anything in the last couple of years, generally speaking, is going to be in the reference manual. But I'm going to show you the data types laid out and sort of organized so that you can tell what's kind of connected and such. So we have our images, which is like your visual. So we'll call this the head of the things. This is going to be the body, your story entry. And then you have these other data types. So when you create items, those are kind of a group, and they are related to parcels. So quite often when you make items, they'll go into a parcel if you want to gather them up and create like a treasure parcel for your group. So this, like I said, these might be labeled or titled differently or look a little different, but in most cases, this is something that you'll experience in a lot of the core rule sets. The next thing is NPCs, so your non-player characters, and then your encounters. So this is another functional thing that kind of goes hand in hand. So when you build NPCs, they're likely to go into encounters after that. So when you're building out content and you're moving stuff around, you'll understand there's a little bit of a relationship between these two data sets. The next will be the vehicles, which isn't as common, but I would group this in with the NPCs because they're very similar. So that those two would kind of go together hand in hand as far as how they're handled. And then they also go on the combat tracker too. And then you have your tables, which is a kind of a fun tool to use for randomization and creating content and just to have some variation in your games. So I consider that one of the legs here. And then you have quest items, which are like your goals, your milestones, that sort of thing. It's kind of tied into the story. And essentially, these are all of the main parts of an adventure. And not every book has every one of these data sets. But what you need to understand, or at least try to understand, is that you have these group filters. And if they're not filtered to the content that you're looking at or that you want to focus on, it can get a little overwhelming and get frustrating and can really, make for a long day. So if I was going to focus on Lost Mine of Phandelver, over here in the encounters, I might filter to part 1. Over here on the NPCs, if there are any in this campaign, I would filter to that to start with. And then over here on the right, there are 2 category sets for Lost Mine. So you have one for mundane items and one for magic items. So I'm just going to go to the Lost Mine of Phandelver items here. So these are all the mundane items mostly. And then over here in parcels, if there's any treasure parcels, I can filter to that. And then for story, if I'm going to run chapter 1, I'll just filter to that. And then down here on the bottom where the quests are, I'm going to filter to the Lost Mine of Phandelver quests. And if there are any tables, which I believe there are, then I'll filter to those too. So they both have their Yeah. In chapter 3, these come up. So these are all the data windows that are most of them that you'll notice. There might be a couple different ones or additional or less depending on the data types for your rule set. But generally speaking, these groups are where you organize the content and how they're organized when you load the modules. Now, when you do character creation, that's another thing I'll go over. So I'm going to go ahead and close these out. So this is your campaign data that I had explained there. The next thing is the player-facing data. So this is your backgrounds, classes, feats in this case. Some rule sets don't have these, but here's races and skills and spells. So this is where I think a lot of the confusion comes in, especially during character creation. So these data type windows aren't always open and present during character creation, but I wanted to show you something about these. So a lot of times when you go through a character wizard, these don't even have to be opened. All that data is presented through the character wizard. However, if you do a manual creation or you want to look something up or whatever it might be, you also have filters. So if I only want the stuff from the player's handbook, I can filter this out to just the player's handbook. And one of the complaints or the confusion points is, why are there 6 different clerics when I only need, basically I'm making just a cleric? A lot of that has to do with the design of Fantasy Grounds and also the way that the content is put together in Fantasy Grounds. So there isn't really any way to exclude the other copies other than using this filter. And the reason being is if you took only one header and you don't have all the other books, or maybe you have a different variety of books, it's not going to display the options very well that are only exclusive to that book. So if you want to build a cleric, let's say, that is only available in a certain book, then you need to filter the actual classes to that particular book. So if you only want stuff from Xanathar's Guide, these are all the specific ones to Xanathar's Guide. However, when you're on all, which is what this will start as, you're going to notice you got 4 or 5 different barbarians. So that's by design in regards to how it's presented. When you have the group selected to all, that's displaying everything that you have activated in your campaign. If you only want to see the stuff in a certain book, you use the filter. That's probably the easiest way to move out the stuff that you don't want to look at or the stuff that you don't want available in your campaign as far as character creation when you're building as a player. However, there are some caveats to that, but nonetheless, even if you only filter to this Fizbins, let's say, when you go to build a character, that's not going to exclude that content from being available as an option in character creation. So regardless of how you have this filtered, all of the content will be available within the character creation process. So I think there's some confusion over that, and I know that there's been a lot of complaints because when you have these selected on all, that actually shows every single thing that's loaded or shared in the campaign. So if you're a GM, if you want to lower that down, only load the books the players are going to need. And you're not always going to know that ahead of time. But once the players have built their first level character, some of those things get shut down. You won't really need those after they get to their archetype. So usually at first level, they get their race and all that stuff. So it depends on the rule set too. But nonetheless, for instance, you have spells. So if you wanted to only see the spells in the player's handbook, you could filter that. The other types of filters are on the bottom. Some of these, like this spell section, are pretty complex. So you can filter by level. So level 0, in this case, is cantrips. You can also go by source. So maybe you only want to look at the bard spells. And then, of course, if it's a ritual spell or not, you have that filter, and then you have the search function. Most of these have a search function, but they do not search within the context of these items. They only search for the titles. So if you search for Aarakocra, it's going to bring that up, but it's not necessarily going to search within that record. So you have to actually bring that up to see what's in it. The other thing is that some of these windows have extra functionality. So for instance, a spell list and a specialization section for classes is present. For races, there's a sub-race tab, so there's that, which is another kind of a sub-menu within the data types. So this can get a little bit frustrating initially when especially if you're not used to Fantasy Grounds. You can get a little bit of options paralysis. So as GMs, we need to make sure that we don't confuse our players and load everything under the sun, but at the same time, we have to make the character creation modules available to them, at least for the first few levels, and then you might only need like 2 or 3 books after that. The player's handbook or your core rule book, and maybe a character creation book, whatever rule set. If you got Pathfinder, you might have the advanced guide there. So it depends on what your needs are. But nonetheless, that is essentially how those data types work. You can create your own. So as a game master or a developer or somebody that's doing a conversion, whatever it may be, you can create your own group. And that is an important and powerful function that you should probably think about getting into the habit of. So if you're going to create a story entry, you can create your own. So if I pop up stories, and you can either use this little drop down here, click this green plus button, or it might be a different color, but you're going to add your category. And usually it'll set up as group 1, group 2, group 3 by default. So if you click the edit list, you can come in here and you can type in my stuff or whatever you want to call it. It could be a chapter of your adventure, whatever it might be. So once you have that created, what you can do is you can get out of the edit mode and then filter to just that group. Obviously right now it's empty, but when I create a new story entry, it's going to be in this section. If you do it on the all section, it's going to show everything, including your new story entry. So if you want it to focus on your content, not the stuff that's already loaded, you can use the filter up here to navigate to that, and that will get you to your content. Now, the other thing you can do here is you can move this around. So if you just kind of expand this little drop down arrow, leave this open, don't select anything, just leave it open, you can drag this to another section. So let's just say you wanted to add it to the Lost Mine of Phandelver. You can drag and drop and left click and release it, and now it's in Lost Mine of Phandelver. You can also move things around if you like in the content that you have loaded already. One thing about that is that it's not permanent. You don't have to, like if you move chapter 2 into chapter 1 or whatever, it's not a permanent change, and it is only per campaign. It's not going to destroy or ruin the original adventure. So it might confuse you though, because you'll have everything all mixed up, but it does not break the adventure. And if you have to fix anything, like let's say you accidentally drag some stuff in the wrong category, you can go to modules, click on Lost Mine in this case. You can right click on it and do revert changes. So any changes that you made to the loaded base content of that particular module will reset. And quite often, this is the advice that you're given when you're in the middle of a campaign. Fantasy Grounds updates an adventure, let's say, maybe they replace maps or images. To get back to factory or to get all that stuff redone and refixed, you have to revert the campaign, and it will pull in those changes. So it's kind of one thing about running an adventure. If it's brand new and all the different little quirks haven't been worked out, quite often you'll see at least 1 or 2 different revisions over the months where someone might find a typo or maybe a missing map or whatever it might be, something minor. If that isn't updated and you don't revert this change here, it's not going to reflect those changes. You might say, hey, I'm missing that map, but then you go into the forums and you'll find out that they had updated it, but the updates don't show until you go in and revert the changes. So that's to kind of protect your data that you've already worked on. But if you do right click on it and revert changes, you're going to lose a lot of the work that you had. So kind of do that judiciously and with caution, because you might lose all your links and all the stuff that you have planned for your adventures. So that's all I wanted to cover today, is just the groups, using the filters, and knowing and understanding the relationship between these different data types. And depending on the rule set, that'll vary. And then, of course, I have all this stuff over here loaded on the right-hand side that can add to the confusion because you got just way too many things here. So once you're done at first level or your first couple levels with Fantasy Grounds and building characters, you can go to your activation window and come over here on the right where the load filter is and click that, and it'll only show the stuff that's loaded. And to be quite honest, since I have the core books loaded, I don't need the SRD, so I can unload those. Because those are what you get when you first start using Fantasy Grounds. You don't need those because they're already covered in the other books. And then as you build characters, you might get rid of, let's say, Tasha's, because you're all done with that. But then you might have a spell or a magic item or something that's tied in with your character that's in one of these other books. So you probably leave that one. But as you don't need stuff anymore, you can close them. So for instance, Visbins, after third level, if I'm building a ranger out of that book, once he's got to a certain level, I'll probably leave it because that's a class feature and that's going to level up over time. So I'd probably leave that. But if you're going to use like Monsters of the Multiverse for a player's thing, you don't need to necessarily have this open the whole time because you get that at first level. So quite often when you're building a character, you get your race at the very beginning. So once you have all created your first level characters and you're moving on, you can actually unload that. So it kind of pares down the content that you need and what you have open. There are occasions where they may have a spell or a feat or some sort of item that's attached to their character sheet. And if that's the case, they'll get a little warning that says, hey, you need this book, and then your GM can just activate it for you. No big deal. The big deal comes when you're leveling up. You need to have those books active and open. But once you're done building the character, the reference to a special spell or some sort of feat or something isn't going to break the character. It's only when you're leveling up that you want to make sure that those books are open. And I would frankly just leave them open for a little while, at least till third level, and then you'll get an understanding of which characters are using which content. So anyways, that's enough for today. I don't want to get too deep into it, but hopefully that helps some of you understand, kind of wrap your mind around this platform. And this is also something that you'll learn over time and getting used to placing your windows away from the center. So now if I close spells and I open those back up, I know where they're going to go. They're just going to be on the bottom right corner. So this is that with skills. So here's spells right here. So now when I close these and open them back up, they're going to go where I left them. And that's an important thing to remember as you're accessing data in Fantasy Grounds. So take care, everyone.